In America's century-long romance with the automobile, the passion has never burned brighter than with hot rods. Be they immaculate show cars, gritty racers, or somewhere in between, hot rods embody the core values that made this country great. Innovation, competition, improvisation, good looks, fast cars, and the relentless drive to succeed. As told by the legends, old and new, who lived it. This is the incredible true story of an American icon, the hot rod. Hello, I'm Chip Foose. There is no more exciting experience in racing than to watch two dragsters roar down the quarter-mile stretch. Today, drag racing is enjoyed worldwide by millions of race fans. But in the beginning, the competition was a sport of home-built cars and amateur competitors. The early 1950s saw drag racing explode in popularity across the country. Thanks to the efforts of Wally Parks, Robert E. Peterson, and the Safety Safari, drag strips were popping up in the Midwest, South, and Northeast, far from hot rodding's birthplace. But California also saw a dramatic uptick in drag racing, thanks to the accessibility of strips and the run-what-you-brung mentality.
You could drive a few miles and you'd be at the track. It really got so overpopulated that you could hit 2 or 3 tracks in the same day.
Drag racing was something you could do every weekend, anywhere in the country. Because we built the Streamliner and we were getting very sophisticated in our minds, we became a Bonneville-only racing group. That meant we were only going to run once a year. And in the meantime, our friends are going out to Pomona and everything, racing every weekend.
Drag racing was also a much more accessible spectator sport than racing at the lakes or Bonneville. And many second-generation hot rodders grew up along quarter-mile tracks.
Not as many spectators at the lakes because it's not very spectacular up there. You know, you can't get close to the cars. At the drag races, you have guys 20 feet from the cars running down the strip. So it gives the spectators more of a thrill to be closer to the cars.
My dad took me to car shows and drag races. We went to the first race at Pomona. I remember vividly sitting on the hay bales and watching Alex drive the SoCal Coupe. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I rode my bicycle to the drags when I was in grade school. In fact, 2 heroes at the time were Tommy Ivo and Art Chrisman, and now, this many years later, they're actually my pals, and it's something you never dream of. I mean, those are magazine guys. In fact, Art denies this, but I was over watching the 25 car one afternoon, and I was on my bicycle, and he told me to get the bicycle away from his car. But he says he never would say that, but he did. And Art was just like a major hero for me, just a major hero.
Growing up in Hollywood and hanging out at San Fernando Drags, there's one guy that just was so much a part of the culture, and that's Tommy Ivo, TV Tommy Ivo. He always looked 12 and still looks 12 today, but he had the coolest cars, all with the nailhead Buick engines in them. That guy knew showmanship, put it together right, and went really, really fast.
My first trip to a drag strip was a memory that I hope have forever. It was Lions Drag Strip. My buddies and I were 15 years old. At that time, Mickey Thompson, who was certainly one of my hot rod heroes and automotive heroes, was managing Lions Drag Strip, and he had several weeks before that set the one-way world speed record in Challenger 1, which was the most beautiful creation I had ever seen. I actually got to meet Mickey Thompson and shake his hand, and he autographed my pit pass. And from that point on, I was just so hooked.
In the early 50s, racers built multi-purpose cars that could run just as well at the drag strip as on the more demanding surfaces of the dry lakes. But as drag racing evolved, it became clear that what worked at Bonneville wouldn't necessarily work over a quarter mile of asphalt. Drag racers had different priorities and different needs.
We all had to start building a different kind of car for drag racing, because trying to build the same car for Bonneville and drag racing, you were going to lose one or the other way. So.
Now, the drag race is 1,320 feet, and the lakes is like 2-3 miles long. So you're on the throttle a lot longer at the lakes than you were at the drag racing. So the drag racing was, pretty quick, just like that. It took more skill to drag race than it did to go to the dry lake, because you really had to be on your toes. Back then, you shifted the transmission, and sometimes the guy shift twice, sometimes the guy shift once. The main thing is beating the guy off the starting line.
In drag racing, it's brute horsepower. You drive to the quarter mile and the thing's dying at that point. So it's like, what can I say, sailboat racing and motorboat racing. They're boats, but they don't mix in the same category. So no, I never did get out to that. Mine was all drag racing.
Paradoxically, the biggest problem for drag racers in the early days was going too fast.
The faster it went, the little harder it was to stop, because you didn't have a parachute, and you had two-wheel hydraulic brakes, and the drag strips weren't the longest thing in the world, and that was your biggest worry, is stopping. You could always go fast, but then you had to stop too. Like Paradise Mesa at San Diego. I mean, they had a good drag strip, but they didn't have any room to stop. You almost had to spin it out. I told the guys, you got to lengthen the drag strip. He said, well, you guys are going too fast. That's why we're here,
The fun stops at the finish line. You're racing down there and you're looking over to see where the other guy is. The motor's running good. And, does it feel good? Then you get to the finish line and you gotta get the darn thing stopped. I mean, it was all but the Flintstones sticking your feet out the bottom of the car to hold it from going too far.
Increasing top speeds led to the NHRA's temporary and controversial ban on high-powered nitromethane fuel.
Nitromethane doubles the horsepower right away. And not only that, but it was in the experimental stage. It'd blow up in your face every time you turned around. In reality, they had to cut the speed back some. We bumped off enough guys the way it was. You know what they say about pioneers, they get arrows in their ass. Well, that happened a lot. In my case, in Southern California, they were almost all NHRA tracks, so gas then became the dominating force.
One of the most successful early drag racers was Art Chrisman, who, like many of his contemporaries, got his start on the dry lakes and public streets in the late 1940s.
Ladies and gentlemen, Art Chrisman.
He was also a big success at Bonneville, becoming one of the first people to exceed 200 miles per hour in 1952. But it was in the quarter mile that he would make his most lasting impression.
I had a 36 four-door sedan, and I went out there with my girlfriend, and I sit on the sidelines and watch them run, and I said, well, my car will run faster than some of those guys, and she said, well, show me. Well, I didn't have the money, to enter it. She says, well, I do. So she gave me the money, and I entered it, and I won a trophy, first time out. And when I won that little trophy, it was only about that high, and it was pretty good. So then on, we just started drag racing. And then I got the 25 car, which we call it. It was an old Lakes car. It was built in the early 30s. In fact, Wally took care of it when he was a kid. So it became a very famous car all through the years. It was, the guys had it at the lakes, and it had different Model T engines in it and Model A's and flatheads, and I got it, had a flathead in it, and I put a Chrysler in it, and it was like 89-inch wheelbase, and it run 115, then 120, and 128, 130. As we built better motors and we got better tires, we just made more horsepower and put more nitro in it, and we just kept going faster and faster. And then one day I built a brand new motor and half-stroker and put a lot of nitro in it, and it eventually wound up to be the first car to run 140 miles an hour to drag strip. We went to the drags and went to the lakes, and it done very well. We just started drag racing from there. We just kept on going.
In 1955, the NHRA held its first national championship in Great Bend, Kansas, as a way of splitting the difference between West Coast and East Coast drag racers. Art Chrisman's importance was such that he was asked by Wally Parks to play a special part in this historic affair.
He came by my shop and told me, "We want your car back there for this first meet." My 25 car was the first car down the strip at Great Bend, Kansas.
Unfortunately, the final day of the inaugural NHRA Nationals was rained out. A month and a half later, the competitors reconvened in Phoenix, Arizona to make up the last few races. Top eliminator went to Calvin Rice, who reached 140 miles per hour in his Mercury flathead-powered dragster. The NHRA really gained traction after the first Nationals. The cars themselves were evolving at breakneck speed. The flathead V8, the engine of choice for hot rodders since before World War II, was nearing the end of its competitive days. And the creation of an entirely new kind of dragster would further distance them from their lakes racing ancestors.
Not only was the flathead dying out, but the cars that didn't have the slingshot driver was dying out. So my car, 25 car, I set up high and top of the rear end, and a couple of cars came back to Great Bend, like Mickey Thompson's and Calvin Rice's and Ed Lisinski's, and they all had the driver sitting back behind the rear end. They called them slingshots. So I came home and I took the 25 car all apart and cut it all up and was going to sit behind the rear end. Well, it looked so goofy, I said, this ain't going to work. So we built a whole new car, which became the Hustler car.
The slingshot body, pioneered by the legendary Mickey Thompson, took a radical approach to wheelbase and weight distribution and set the standard for dragster design for the next 15 years.
We used to sit up in the car like you would in a roadster in the first dragsters. Then Mickey Thompson came out with the first slingshot. He sat out behind the rear tires, which let him move the motor further back, which gave you better traction. They looked at that and they didn't want to let him run that. Boy, that was way too dangerous. I admired Mickey as much as anybody in drag racing that I ever did.
One of the advantages of the slingshot was the longer wheelbase compared to other dragsters, a lesson that wasn't lost on the racers of the era, and which heralded later dragsters that exceeded 20 feet in length.
When we first started out, 92 inches seemed to be the standard of the industry, as opposed to 300 inches nowadays. And it was a matter of stability, of course. The longer the arrow, the straighter it goes.
Art Chrisman called his new slingshot body car the Hustler, and it would become one of the winningest and most distinguished dragsters of the era.
Hustler was on Hot Rod magazine cover in early '59 with the blower out front, just like we ran at Oklahoma City. And then later on, we put the blower on top, and that's when it ran 180 miles an hour. And then right after that, we put a parachute on. First car to run 180, first car to run a parachute. It had a lot of firsts also, and we won with it a lot.
The Hustler was also Art's laboratory for engine development, and a change to the supercharger on the car's stroke Chrysler Hemi would prove to be decisive.
With the blower up front, we just didn't get the traction that we thought we should have. It ran a lot better with the blower up on top because we got a better traction and better distribution and everything. Put it on the car, went to Riverside, and it ran 180 miles an hour just like that, right off the trailer.
While Art Chrisman vanquished all comers in the Hustler, another drag racing legend was making a name for himself in a very different car. TV Tommy Ivo started his career as a child actor, one of the few to gracefully make the transition to working adult actor. But an early encounter with drag racing left a lifelong mark.
When I got my first car when I was 16 years old, we had to go to the drag strip to see what it was like. I didn't even know what a drag strip was, you know? So out we went. I won 2 trophies with the thing. I won one for setting a class record and one for winning a class. And of course, to an actor, that was 2 Oscars in one day, and I was hooked. What made me a good drag racer was the little guy syndrome. I was 115 pounds soaking wet, and they used to tease me to death that I had to run around in the shower to get wet. Well, when I got these drag race cars, obviously, It was like getting on the varsity team. I had my muscles that I could slip on, and that had a big influence on me.
Tommy's first serious dragster turned out to become one of the most celebrated and recognizable hot rods ever built.
This was it. This is where all the hot rods were being built. I had to have me one of those. So we went out in the desert and looked around for an old T-body that had been abandoned out there. The Buick motor ran so good in my stock car, that's why I put it into the Roadster, because why wouldn't it run good in a much lighter car? But of course we had to go to the drags to see what it looked like. I pulled the top off because I was afraid it would blow off at speed. We started racing the car, street roadster class. It ended up never losing a race in that class and setting the track record at every track we ever ran out. Ran 119 miles an hour in slightly under 12 seconds. I think it was about 1170 on it. Nowadays, the pro stockers are running better than my first fuel dragster did. But at the time, it was just ripping the asphalt off the ground.
He built the coolest car, a little Buick, injected Buick Tiers. I still remember seeing the kit of that in a model shop window in England. I just thought it was, you know, something I would never ever attain.
What separated good dragsters from great dragsters was often a matter of mindset, or at the very least, nerves.
Just before the light goes on, or in my days when they pull the starter's flag, I completely blot out everything. I want to let the clutch out. I tell myself, let the clutch out, let the clutch out. Push on the gas, push on the gas. And then the little voice on the other side of my shoulder says, not yet, not yet, not yet. And I say, no, 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 no. And by the time the light goes on, it's relaxation to change feet and go down the course. Total concentration is what does the trick. They used to call me, one of my nicknames was Instant Ivo. We didn't have reaction times in those days, but I visibly got off the starting line faster than the other cars. And you know, I think that might have something a little to do with big animals and small animals. You know, little dogs, when you walk into the room, they come straight off the floor. You walk in, a big dog looks at you and looks back again.
One of the most difficult things for a drag racer was coming back from a crash.
You know, going through the lights, upside down, backwards, on fire, here at Pomona. And wanting to go back, said, did we win? You know, did we win that round? Can we go back tomorrow? Can we rebuild the car? I mean, the guys just keep going.
I turned one car over one time at Pomona. The thing exploded so bad that it rolled right over in the lights and ran 240 miles an hour upside down and backwards. And I didn't get a scratch. It hit the guardrail and came apart like a $2 watch. The only thing that made me mad was that time. It scared me so bad, I closed my eyes and missed the whole show. But a funny deal about that, when it first started over, it was sheer terror. But in my own mind, I said, well, this is it. I'm not going to get hurt. And at that point, it got euphoric. The frightening part of it went away. So that's an interesting thing to have experienced in life.
As the 1950s wore on, drag racers in Southern California considered themselves the finest in the sport. But more and more, they began to hear about the remarkable exploits and incredible times of an obscure racer from Florida, a man who would become the most celebrated drag racer in history, Big Daddy Don Garlits.
Garlits has been my hero. You know, he runs so good all these years. He's a racer's racer. He does it a lot like the approach. I don't put myself in his category, but like I did it all. I built it, I tuned it, I got the sponsors, I towed it all over the country. He did the same thing.
The East Coast-West Coast rivalry came to a head in Bakersfield, California in March of 1959. The Bakersfield Smokers, a local car club, sponsored the first U.S. Fuel and Gas Championship, also known as the March Meet and the Smokers Meet. Many historians consider it one of the most important events in hot rod history.
That was the Woodstock of drag racing.
It was the first time people from all over the United States came together in one common place and ran fuel and ran gas to see who was the best. It was a tremendous event.
All of us West Coast guys didn't think Garlits and the Greek and Pistonian and Sullivan, those guys were running as fast as they were. And they didn't think we were running as fast as we were. So the Bakersfield Smokers got up enough money to pay Garlits and those guys to come out here. They had a purse, I think, up $500 to win. I think that's the first time we ever got any big money. I mean, you get a war bond for 25 bucks or 50 bucks, or that was the start of drag racers getting paid to tour, so to speak. It became an East-West Coast battle.
It was a battle that the West Coast would win resoundingly. The heralded Garlits had to drop out due to engine troubles, leaving a clear field for the eventual top eliminator, Art Chrisman and his Hustler. Prevailing as top eliminator in the gas division was none other than Tommy Ivo. The March meet ushered in the era of professional drag racing. While there was still room for the privateer or small team to compete, the influx of money, sponsorship, and factory support moved drag racing more and more away from its humble origins and into a mainstream sport. It would take another decade, but by the early 1970s, drag racing's image would break with its home-built hot rod ancestry. I'm Chip Foose. Thanks for watching. Next time on American Icon, the Hot Rod.
Bonneville was such a unique place to run and so famous in speed records. Anybody that ran at Bonneville set a record. They were noted as being really fast, and their cars were beautiful.
The FIA didn't believe that an amateur effort in America from California could be setting these speeds, and they sent observers out there, and these European folk came over, and they watched and they timed them. They were very surprised.